Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're digging into a pretty significant development. It's about education policy.
That's right. We're looking at a presidential order, actually, from February 14th, 2025.
Right, and its main focus is ending COVID-19 vaccine mandates in schools.
Yeah, exactly. So our goal here for this deep dive is really to understand what's in this order, the key parts, and maybe what it means for you listening.
Especially if you're in that, say, 22 to 45 age group.
You might be a parent, maybe you're involved in higher education yourself, or maybe you're just, interested in these ongoing discussions about personal freedom versus access to education.
Yeah, it touches on a lot. So let's get into it.
Okay.
So the order starts out basically stating its main goal. It wants to address what it calls coercion.
Yeah, it says some educational institutions are coercing students, forcing them to get the COVID-19 vaccine just to enroll or, participate in person.
And the reasoning behind that stance.
Well, the administration seems to be emphasizing that parents, and young adults too, should have access to what they consider accurate data.
Data about what specifically?
About the risks of serious COVID-19 illness for, younger people, and also about ways to mitigate those risks.
Okay, so the idea is if people have the information, they should be able to decide for themselves.
That seems to be the implication, yeah. That informed individuals should have the autonomy, the freedom to make their own vaccination choices.
And the language in the order, it's pretty direct about how it views these mandates.
It really is. It calls them an intolerable infringement on personal freedom.
Wow, okay. Strong words.
And it doesn't stop there. Also, a usurpation of parental authority and a burden on students of many faiths.
So that really sets the stage, doesn't it? It gives you a clear sense of the administration's position.
Absolutely. It frames the whole issue, and that leads directly into the policy itself.
Okay.
The core policy is that discretionary federal funds.
Discretionary meaning?
Meaning the money Congress decides on each year, not the automatically allocated funds. So the executive branch has a bit more say over these.
Got it. So those specific funds
should not go to support schools or universities that mandate COVID-19 vaccination for their in-person programs.
And that covers everything from K-12 up to higher ed.
That's right. Elementary schools, high schools, colleges, universities, a whole spectrum.
That distinction about discretionary funds feels pretty key for understanding the sort of mechanism here.
It absolutely is. That's where the leverage seems to lie.
Okay, so who exactly does this order apply to? Does it define the institutions?
It does. It lists the types of educational entities covered, pulling from existing U.S. law. You've got educational service agencies, elementary and secondary schools, institutions of higher education, local educational agencies, state educational agencies.
So basically the standard definitions covering most public and often private nonprofit education receiving federal funds.
Pretty much, yeah. A very broad range.
All right, so then we get to the part about how they plan to end what the order calls COVID-19 vaccine mandate coercion.
Right. This is the action part. It directs the Secretary of Education to issue guidelines.
Guidelines on what?
On the legal obligations schools have regarding these mandates, and it says as soon as practicable.
So fairly quickly, presumably.
One would assume. And these guidelines are meant to zero in on a few key areas.
Like what?
Things like parental authority, obviously huge if you have kids in K-12. Also religious freedom, accommodations for disabilities, and the legal principle of equal protection.
So it seems like they're anticipating potential legal friction points around mandates.
That's a good way to put it. Highlighting those areas suggests they expect challenges or want to provide clarity based on existing law. Like, for religious freedom, the guidelines would probably detail how schools need to handle exemption requests based on, sincere religious beliefs.
And there's a specific deadline attached to this next step, right?
Yes, a 90-day deadline. So from February 14th, that puts it around mid-May 2025.
And what needs to happen by then?
By then, the Secretary of Education, working with the Secretary of Health and Human Services, needs to deliver a plan to the president.
A plan for what, exactly?
Well, first, it needs to outline a strategy to actually end these mandates, the ones they see as coercive, while staying consistent with the law.
Okay, a strategy.
And interestingly, the order says the plan can include proposals for new legislation.
Ah, so they might suggest Congress needs to act if current laws aren't enough.
Potentially, yes. But the plan has to do more than just suggest strategies.
What else?
It needs to include a list.
A list.
A list of federally funded educational institutions, schools, universities that are not complying with the guidelines that the secretary is supposed to issue.
Wow. So naming names, essentially.
Seems like it. Identifying the institutions deemed non-compliant.
And then what happens to those institutions on the list?
This is where the enforcement part comes in, the real teeth of the order. The plan must spell out how each federal department or agency will prevent future funding from going to these non-compliant places and potentially even rescind current funding.
Rescind, like take back money already allocated.
That's what it says, to the maximum extent permitted by law. So they'd have to operate within legal limits, but the intent is clear, use the power of the purse.
So the financial pressure is the main tool here, withholding those discretionary federal dollars.
Exactly. It's a common tactic, really using federal funding to influence state and local policy across various domains. We've seen it before.
Right. So pulling it together, the federal government is signaling it wants to use its financial influence to strongly discourage these vaccine mandates in education settings.
That's the crux of it. But there are a few standard sort of caveats included.
Like what?
Well, the order clarifies it doesn't change the existing legal powers of federal departments or agencies,
Okay.
or the basic functions of the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB standard stuff.
And anything else important in those final provisions?
Yes, a couple of key points. One is that actually doing all this depends on applicable law and, crucially, the availability of appropriations.
Meaning Congress still controls the money supply.
Precisely. The order can direct how money should be used, but Congress has to actually approve the funds in the first place. It's not a blank check.
That seems like an important check and balance there.
Definitely.
Definitely.
And the last point, which you often see in these orders, is that it explicitly states it doesn't create any new legal rights. Meaning an individual can't just take this order to court and sue the government, or a school based solely on the order itself to demand some specific benefit or action. It's a policy directive, not a new law creating private lawsuits.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's try to sum this up for everyone listening.
Sounds good.
We have this presidential order from February 2025. It clearly states opposition to COVID-19 vaccine mandates in schools and universities, calling them coercive.
Right. And it directs the Secretary of Education to quickly issue guidelines on the legal boundaries. Think parental rights, religious freedom.
And then, within 90 days, deliver a plan to enforce this policy.
A plan that involves identifying non-compliant institutions and laying out how federal agencies will potentially withhold or even claw back discretionary funding from them.
So, using financial leverage as the main enforcement mechanism.
What seems to be the core strategy outlined in the order, yes. It's aiming to shift how educational institutions handle COVID-19 vaccine policies by tying it to federal dollars, emphasizing individual liberty and parental rights themes that might resonate quite a bit with you, especially if you're navigating this with family or in your own education.
It definitely leaves us and you with a lot to think about, particularly for those of you in that 22 to 45 age range, maybe juggling careers, family, education. How do you see this order playing out? Where's the right balance between public health goals, individual freedoms, and making sure everyone has access to education?
Yeah, what questions does this raise for you about where education policy and health policy might be headed? It's certainly a significant development.
Definitely something to watch. Thanks for diving deep with us today.